this meeting will be recorded and posted to the Lake Balboa website at the conclusion of the meeting. Again, my name is James Brown. I serve our community as a volunteer member of the Lake Balboa Neighborhood Council, as well as the chair of the Health and Public Safety Committee. And the idea and the purpose of the Health and Public Safety Committee is to ensure that our community is safe and secure for all residents, stakeholders, as well as businesses by providing timely and key health and public safety information to help keep our community safe, to prevent, protect against, and mitigate, as well as respond to and recover from threats or incidents. My background, in addition to that on the Health and Public Safety Committee of the Lake Balboa Neighborhood Council, is that of a member of the West Valley LAPD Volunteer Community Patrol, as well as a instructor for LAPD teaching active shooter survival training for the community. And so with that, the topic of our meeting tonight, as you might well expect, is active shooter preparedness. And what I'll do right off the bat is to share my screen. Okay. How do I don't see the first, here we go. Okay. Here I posted the agenda for tonight's meeting so that you can go along with me. And as I mentioned, the topic of tonight's meeting has to do with active shooter preparedness. Now, this is not to say or not meant as a discussion regarding gun laws or pending legislation in the country or as well as the state legislature, but simply as a way to have the community understand how important it is that everyone acknowledge and understand the importance of public safety when it comes to preventing gun violence, mass shootings, and active shooting events. Now, I'll stop sharing that. Again, welcome to everyone. The idea of active shooter and mass shooting events is as follows. As I mentioned before, the purpose of this meeting tonight is not to instill fear, but also to convince everyone how important it is to prepare for the eventuality of an active shooter event. Just as we prepare for earthquakes and other types of emergencies that happen in our community, it's important that we are aware that active shooter, mass shooting events, although rare that you would be actively involved in one, they're closer than anyone would think. There was a time when the idea of an active shooting event, such as Columbine High School or Stony Hook Elementary, we remembered the names of those incidents. But today, as many of us all too well know, there's so many active shooting events that occur that we don't know one active shooting event where it took place from the next. So I wanted to start our meeting by let's get a definition of what I mean by an active shooter or mass shooter. Does anyone care to give me a definition of an active shooter? Any one of you that are in attendance? Can anyone define what an active shooter is versus a mass shooter? Yes, Ruth.
An active shooter versus a mad? Is that what you said?
Mass. M-A-S.
Mass shooter. Oh, okay. Well, an active shooter wouldn't necessarily have to be at a huge place, like a huge concert like it was in Las Vegas. Like the school wasn't as huge as the... No, I don't really know the difference.
That's okay. It's important that we all do. The FBI defines an active shooter as an individual that is actively engaged in killing or intending to kill people in a confined space or other populated area. not only to kill them regardless of who they are, race, creed, or the like, not only to kill them, but also to kill them quickly, because an active shooter knows that it will only be a matter of minutes. Once the call has gone out to law enforcement, it will only be a matter of minutes before law enforcement arrives. And so the goal of the active shooter is to kill as many people as possible in as short a period of time as possible. Now, a mass shooter, on the other hand, is one that's generally described as an incident in which 4 or more people, including the perpetrator, are injured by gunfire. And even though definitions don't differ, as a result, the effect to reporting and statistics, depending upon the source, is the same. All agencies, both state, local, government, law enforcement agencies, are in agreement that active shooter and mass shooting incidents are on the rise in the United States. And this causes the United States to, I'm going to pull up another slide here. Because of that, the United States, okay. Pull up, you can see here by this slide that I've just put up, the US leads the world in terms of mass shooting and active shooting events. You notice a difference in the slide below. You see that the United States at the bottom leads the industrialized nation by far, all the industrialized nations in terms of mass shootings, fatalities, and active shootings. We now average 7 mass shooting incidents a week, or 1 per month, depending upon the definition of mass shooting. But most of these incidents are over in 30 minutes or less, some in as little time as 4 minutes, with few exceptions. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Uvalde, Texas, for example, that took more than 80 minutes. But most incidents are over by the time law enforcement arrives on the scene. Now, what does this mean? This means that we as a society, we as a nation have to realize the fact that active shooting events are on the increase. The FBI has already said that they have tripled over the past 5 years. To date, we have had over 472 active shooting events in this country, and this is to date. Last year, it was 378. So you can see how we have extended or surpassed the number of active shooting events, and the number keeps climbing. Now, understand as well how important it is that we realize where preparedness comes in. Again, let me go back and reemphasize the fact that the object of this meeting is not to put the fear of God in anyone, but to remind people that just as we prepare for other types of emergency events like earthquakes, fires, and the like, we have to prepare ourselves both physically and mentally as to what we would do if we ever found ourselves in the middle of an active shooting event. The other thing we have to realize is this, that we can't expect police officers will always be there to protect us until we face the reality that we'll never create effective policies to combat mass shootings. And until that happens, we have the onus of protecting ourselves is each other. We have to protect ourselves in the case we find ourselves in the middle of an active shooting event. We can no longer allow law enforcement to do that. Take, for example, let me go back to April 20th of 1999. That was the Columbine High School shooting. Columbine High School shooting. And throughout this presentation, by the way, I will not mention the names of any active shooters by name. We don't want to pay them that sort of homage. But the Columbine High School shooting lasted for more than an hour. Local law enforcement, once the call went out, local law enforcement arrived at Columbine High School, surrounded the school itself, and waited for the SWAT team to arrive. It was more than 28 minutes later that SWAT did arrive and went into the school to subdue Dylan, and missing their name, to subdue the two active shooters who had already by that time killed themselves. Now, that's an odd similarity to what recently happened in Uvalde, Texas. Because in 1999, after the Columbine High School event, law enforcement units or agencies all across the nation agreed that they would adopt a new policy whereby upon an active shooting event and the response to that, law enforcement would go right in to subdue the shooter. And as we all know, that this did not happen in the Uvalde, Texas incident. So I say that to say that, again, we can't always expect the police to arrive in time to save us. So an active shooting event is one whereby the goal and purpose of the active shooter, whether they be a man or woman, is to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And in just about every case, the active shooter will kill themselves because they know that that would be the intent of law enforcement once they arrive. Now, generally speaking, law enforcement will arrive at the scene of an active shooting event within 15 minutes. It's not always the case, as we've seen, but generally speaking, the average response time of law enforcement at an active shooting event is 15 minutes. And so we have to realize that there is no pattern to an active shooter and what they do. Now, why should we have to, let's ask ourselves, why should schools, businesses, organizations, and persons prepare for the possibility of an active shooting event? It's to better prepare ourselves to deal with an active shooter situation and to raise the awareness of behaviors that represent incident indicators and characteristics of an active shooter. What do I mean by that? Let me just show you another slide here. Okay. Let's take a look at this. Here's a quick look at active shooter incidents in the United States up to 2021, from 2000 to 2021. And you'll notice that the vast majority of active shooting events have occurred in the commercial sector. In this case, 43.7%. And in the commercial sector, this represents businesses that are storefront, meaning on a boulevard or street or in a shopping mall, as well as in a private office building, whereby the perpetrator of the active shooter has penetrated that business and has killed people to meet their ends. Next to the commerce slice of the pie, I should say, is the educational section. It's the educational slice, which contributes to about 42%, not 42%, but more than 15.5% of the active shooter incidents occur in the education sector, 20.6%. And that number is climbing. The number of school shootings has increased from one year to the next, and it continues to climb. But this is not the purpose of this meeting tonight. But as you can see from the slices of the pie, the open space, government, healthcare facilities, houses of worship, and residences that all experience active shooting events of some sort. So it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in a restaurant, you can be in a theater, you can be in a school or an office building. There have been cases where active shooting events have occurred and continue to occur to this day. Now, what does that mean for us? The active shooting event are situations that are unpredictable and evolve quickly. The immediate deployment of police is required to stop the shooting because as the active shooter incidents are over within 10 to 15 minutes before police arrive. Individuals like us must be prepared both mentally as well as physically to deal with an active shooter situation. What exactly does an active shooter look like? Let me just show this graphic. Okay. what does an active shooter look like? They can look like anyone. They can look like the military officer in the top left of the screen there. They can look like the red-headed fellow at the bottom middle. They can look like the fellow at the bottom right. They can look just about like anyone. And so there is no clear-cut definition or profile as to what an active shooter looks like. But what law enforcement has been able to do, and I'll show you this part. Okay. What law enforcement has been able to do is to put together information based on interviews that they've conducted with perpetrators of active shooter or mass shooting events in order to come up with a generalized definition of what an active shooter might look like. It's a person who is antisocial, a loner personality, nursing a grudge against his peers or her peers or supervisors, white male in their 30s, but that number has changed. It's now between the age of 12 to 88. And 60% of the active shooters that have been identified to date have been white. The shooter displays aggressive or threatening behavior and struggles with job or academic performance and is unlikely to have a criminal or mental health history. So this is a general characteristic as to what an active shooter might look like. But that's not enough. That's not enough. We have to know more in terms of what an active shooter might look like and what we are to do about it. As I said, the active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve quickly and are over within 10 to 15 minutes of time. We know that an active shooter events are a fast-growing epidemic with over 472 incidents so far. And so predicting the next active shooter event is going to be impossible because there is no one shooter profile, but there are ways to spot signs of suspicious behavior for us to be vigilant about reporting these activities. And this can help us to prevent an attack and maybe save our own lives, if not the lives of people that we know and people that we love. So let's take a look at this. There are warning signs that are prevalent. You saw from the circle pie chart that I displayed before about what the general characteristics of an active shooter might be. So let's narrow this down even further. What are the initial warning signs that should tip us off in terms of something amiss with people around us, with people that we know, with people that we meet in our everyday lives? It's extremely difficult to profile the active shooter, but these are the most common definitions and characteristics of the shooter. Depressed, males, again, 12 to 88. The key element with respect to initial warning signs is that the active shooter is prepared to die. This is why, in keeping with the definition of an active shooter, the active shooter's goal is to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, because they know that they will probably take their own life as well. The active shooter is disconnected. They all have a desire to destroy. They harbor violent fantasies at times, and they harbor suicidal thoughts and gestures with no exit strategy. They blame others for their own shortcomings, and they reject isolation from peers. They have a history of violent threats. There are intermediate warning signs of an active shooter. Paranoia, where an potential active shooter might say, everybody is against me. They express empathy or to individuals committing violence. This is why, when we see reports of active shooting events that have taken place, the news media today has stopped saying the name of the active shooter, because we know from experience that other potential active shooters are studying the episodes and the events committed by other active shooters because they want to compare themselves to them. They want to emulate them. They want to write their own manifest. They want to create their own infamous legacy as to the number of active shooting events taking place. You might remember the active shooting event that took place in New Zealand a few years ago, where the active shooter actually had a video camera attached to his helmet, and he actually filmed the slaying of Muslims in their temples, in their places of worship, while it was going on, and up until the time that Facebook found out about it and took it off the air. But active shooters like to imitate other active shooters and so forth. For that reason, that law enforcement and the media have stopped even speaking about the active shooter more than just reporting the event, other than just reporting the event, I should say. If any one of you has any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay. All right. Moving right along. So we talked about how predicting the next active shooter will be impossible because there's no one shooter profile. But there are ways to spot the signs of suspicious behavior for you to be vigilant about reporting these activities. This can help prevent an attack and save lives. Now, recent data indicates that young men who are primarily responsible for committing these active shooting events do so with impunity. Sometimes there is a woman involved in the active shooting event, but generally speaking, she's acting in tandem with the male. And so there are very few women that have actually taken part or been a part of active shooter events. What motivates an active shooter to attack? Since we can't go by physical appearance, or age, we need to look for some psychological or behavioral insights. Common motivation for their actions: rage, relationship, financial troubles, and a desire for infamy. And in many situations, people can't detect warning signs of an active shooter. The shooter may be a stranger whose personal issues others aren't aware of because the shooter approaches and mixes in with the crowd. Again, talking about the warning signs, for whatever reason, an active shooter has a grievance against society or a particular segment, business or house of worship, or a manifesto that they want to bring to light. They use these attacks to gain notoriety. Spotting and reporting a potential threat. Being prepared for an active shooter event means that you must, first of all, acknowledge that the threat exists. Again, that's the reason for this meeting tonight. And I should go on to say that next month at West Valley LAPD, we'll actually teach techniques that individuals can employ if they ever find themselves in the middle of an active shooting event. That will be a live presentation on October 19th at West Valley LAPD. But for now, what we're talking about is a generalized description of an active shooter, what signs to look for. And if you ever find yourself in the midst of an active shooter situation, you have to know what to do in terms of saving your own life. You know, all too many times, and in a lot of cases, people that have been killed in an active shooting event are people who fail to act in enough time to save their own lives. There are not too many of us that actually can recognize the sound of gunfire. Can any one of you recognize the sound of gunfire if you hear it? B, Gary, Ruth?
I'd say so, yes.
Okay, so you can. How about you, Gary? Well, most people don't know or don't, yes, Gary. Most people aren't able to recognize the sound of gunfire. And so when they first hear the sound of gunfire, what they do is to freeze like a deer in the headlights. And this gives the active shooter the opportunity to increase the body count. Because people in an active shooting situation, they doubt their own senses. And because of that, they freeze. And it's those seconds that they hesitate to act that cost lives and has cost lives in the future. We know that when an active shooting event occurs and law enforcement does arrive on the scene, law enforcement's responsibility is to go in and subdue the active shooter. They will bypass civilians that are on the ground, injured, wounded, or even dead, but they won't attend to them until they subdue the active shooter. Now, I'll go so far as to say this situation has now changed. The law enforcement has added a twist in that if they come into an active shooting event, and if they cannot locate the active shooter, they will then tend to the wounded. But in the meantime, it's the responsibility of those that are still alive to tend to the wounded until the all clear has been given. So if you ever find yourself in an active shooting event situation, in the midst of an active shooter situation, there are several things that you can do to save your own life. You can, okay, let me just do this. We've all heard of the run, hide, fight concept. This concept was put into place by the Department of Homeland Security some time ago. The sequence that you see on the screen, the run, hide, fight, is linear, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that direction, in that way, because sometimes you can run, or sometimes you can't run. Sometimes you have to hide first, and then you can fight. Then you have to fight. And so the run, hide, fight scenario is linear in concept, but it doesn't have to necessarily follow that order. But every active shooting event is unique in that you have to decide based on your training, based on what you know about survival, you have to decide what you're going to do. There's no one formula that's going to fit everyone. There are preparedness steps that individuals can take to save their lives in terms if you ever find yourself involved in an active shooting event. There's some steps you can take. First of all, you should always know where the exits are. No matter where you go, no matter where you are, know where the exits are, especially if you are among a crowd. Know where the doors are. Ruth, you have your hand up.
Yes, when you're talking about the run, hide, and then fight, I was having a discussion today in the lunchroom at school, and one teacher was saying that because the question came up, if we were in a lockdown and a child was in the restroom, say, outside the classroom, which happens often, when they came back, we were told we weren't supposed to let them in the classroom. I'm like, no, I think we would let them in no matter what they said. But then a teacher was saying that in cases where more people have survived, they ran, that the kids, she said, I think she was thinking of high school mostly, the kids ran into the neighborhood and ran into, knocked on people's doors.
Yeah.
And that more people escaped by running than by like holding up in the classroom and going under desks or whatever.
Right,
so,
right.
I've never heard of that. So I wanted to ask you about that if
well, here's the scenario. Los Angeles School Police have a different scenario when it comes to active shooter training. As a matter of fact, they won't allow LAPD on site to instruct the run, hide, fight concept that I'm talking about tonight. Now, that may change Now that Carvalho is in, we'll have to wait and see. As a matter of fact, I'm waiting to get a confirmation for him to appear at a CPAP meeting. But the LAUSD police have a different scenario when it comes to run, hide, fight concept. You know, children are schooled and practice a lockdown, turning off lights, locking the door, barring the door, barring windows, pulling down shades and the like. The idea that you mentioned, Ruth, about the teacher letting a student in who might be trapped in the bathroom, that student is probably going to be better off in the bathroom with the lights off and the door closed, because attempting to come back to the classroom and have that door open to expose multitudes of kids in that classroom can be a dangerous situation. So I think that is that's a scenario where training comes into place. When warning goes out, yes, go ahead. Yes,
kindergartner, first grade, third grade, whatever, they're not going to know what to do. Plus, they can't close the bathroom doors. I'm pretty sure they're like open. They either open or lock close, and that's about it. So maybe a high school student might be able to do that, but at elementary, I don't think so.
No, you're absolutely right. Now that you mentioned about that at those particular grade levels, when the active shooting event occurred at Stony Hook Elementary, with all of those young kids, teachers tried to, there were 6 teachers that were killed in that event because they were trying to protect the young kids. And so here again is a scenario where each scenario is going to be different, depending upon the age of the children, the grade level and the like, and how much practice and training that they get. What we're talking about tonight is the active shooter training that is espoused by, and it's been I should say, it's been changed. I've gotten some new information that I incorporated in training. I just trained 30 people at a hospital about 2 weeks ago in North Hollywood. Scenarios different in the hospital than it is in the school, than it is in the business, than it is in the church. And so each situation is different. When I go, for example, to teach a class, an active shooter training class, the first thing I do is to survey the premises. I need to know the surroundings so that when I come in, I'd like to custom tailor what I'm talking about to that specific location. So they're going to be different. And so, but the whole idea is self-preservation here. The whole idea is training ourselves, training our families, training our friends and loved ones as to what to do if you suddenly find yourself in the middle of an active shooting event. You cannot stand around. You cannot wonder what is going on. You saw that run, hide, fight scenario, or that graph that I've just put up. The first instinct is to run, and you should run, and you should grab anybody that you can as you're running. If they don't want to run with you, then you leave them. If you can't run, then you hide. You seek shelter. Anywhere you can, you seek shelter. And if you can't hide, then the last resort is to protect your own life by fighting. And when you fight, you have to go all in. One of the things with an active shooter that I said several slides ago, the active shooter's sole intent is to kill you. No ifs, ands, or buts, to kill you. And so therefore, you have to know that and know that there is no negotiation. There's no falling down on bended knees. There's no begging. There's no negotiation, because that active shooter will kill you. And so there's a mindset that we teach in the active shooter training classes that get people to realize how critical it is to understand where we are as a nation, where we are as individuals. And until things change, we have to look to keep ourselves and our families and our community safe. So going back to the preparedness steps that I talked about before, always, always know where the exits are. First time you walk into, I'll tip you off. If you come to the in-person active shooter training class at West Valley next month, one of the exercises that I'll do, I'll have people close their eyes and point to where they came in. And I'll do that by I'll split the room up, and I will ask people, point to where you came in, and then point to another exit. Because the first thing you have to do in the case of an event like that is to know where the exits are, because it can save your life. Know where potential hiding places are, and have a basic plan, escape plan in mind. And consider carrying a self-defense tool if the law allows. I know in California you can't carry certain self-defense tools because the California state statutes won't allow that. But if you see anyone or anything of suspicious nature, you have to notify those in charge, whether it be management or law enforcement. Now, in the case of a business or an institution, there has to be, as I indicated at the hospital where I was, they have a reporting system in place. And even though entry to that this particular location in North Hollywood you had to be buzzed in, there were times when people would come in after one individual, somebody else would slip in, and there was no means of identification or anything of that nature. So there has to be a reporting system put into place whereby individuals in various departments have a centralized location where they can report suspicious activity. There's a school over in Tarzana, a private school on just off of Tampa, where if you walk in, as soon as you walk into that school, the receptionist desk is wide open. There is no protection. They would be the first to go if a disgruntled parent came in who was embroiled in a bitter custody dispute. They had to make some changes, and they did. They have guards now, and these are the types of activities that businesses have to think about in terms of protecting their employees as well as management. And again, you and your family and other loved ones should not live in fear of a mass shooting, because again, just like we have earthquakes and fires and tornadoes and the like, and bed bugs, we shouldn't be afraid of being prepared in the case of an active shooting event. That's my spiel. I've got more. I don't want to bore you with all of it. I had 10 slides. I went through them quickly, but I want to thank you, and I encourage you to take the active shooter training seriously, and because it's important. Gary, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Quick question. Can you clarify what was the date that you had said the active training?
The second Wednesday in October. I don't have a calendar in front of me. I think it's the 19th.
Okay, so I think you may have misspoke. The 19th is the Health and Public Safety meeting date. The second Wednesday would be the 12th. Would be the 12th.
Then it's the 12th, because
okay.
it's going to be at. Well, thank you, Gary. It's going to be at West Valley.
Got it. So CPAP on the 12th, and then Health and Public Safety on the 19th. Thank you.
That is correct. Thank you, Gary. Does anyone have any comments you'd like to make? I got to tell you, I fully expected to do this meeting by myself, and I was going to record it and put it on the website. But I appreciate the fact that members of the neighborhood council came, and Vienna, thank you so much. Vienna, do you have any announcements that you'd like to make? I know
nothing tailored specifically for this, but of course you all know that I could assist with neighborhood issues, and you know how to reach me. Definitely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I can't emphasize enough how important the active shooter training is. And the first thing we have to do, that we have to spread to the community and our family and so forth, is to acknowledge that active shooting events happen. As I said, so far in 22, we've got over 472 active shooting events, and the year isn't over yet. And so it's going to get worse, and it has gotten worse. And so we can't always allow, or can't always expect that the police will arrive in time. We can't expect that to happen. And so we have to be able to steel ourselves with a mindset and physicality as to what we would do if we suddenly found ourselves in the middle of an active shooting event. And I said from the outset, the chances of you being actively involved in an active shooting event are relatively slim. But nonetheless, those odds are lessening. And so as long as we have these events that take place on a daily basis, we're going to be faced with these circumstances, and we have to know what to do, just as we prepare for earthquakes. Again, I appreciate everyone coming. Does anyone have any comments before I close the meeting?
I was going to say thank you, James, for having the meeting. And I think people will watch it since you recorded it. And the statistics were informative. I didn't know many of those things. And since I'm a teacher, it's pretty scary that 20% happen in schools. But I would also like to say that I feel we need gun control, which would help a lot. And it's
well, again, the object of the meeting is not to engage in a political discussion regarding gun control. I know we all have our feelings about that, but I also said that because we can't rely on police, all the more reason until we get measures taken to control mass shootings and active shooting events, then it will continue to happen. There has to be accountability as well. A few meetings ago, we talked about should parents be held accountable for gun violence committed at schools. And you might remember that back in November of last year, out in the suburb of Detroit, a 17-year-old high school kid got a gun from home and killed people at his school. And the gun was given to him by his parents. They practiced with the gun. The school called his parents several times to report disturbing behavior at school by this particular student. The parents were asked to remove the student from school. They did not. And so the district attorney of that township, south of Detroit, decided that they would charge the parents as well as contributing to this event. So we have laws here in California that hold people accountable for failure to adequately secure guns in a locked and safe environment. And we have laws in place that that try certain events as felonies versus misdemeanors. And so California has the strictest gun control laws in the nation. However, we lead the country in gun violence, we lead the country in active shooting events, and we lead the country in school shootings. And so I don't want to say go figure, but I think we've got a lot of work to do. And it's going to take the activism on the part of parents, as well as state and local government, to make it happen. So with that, if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everybody again for attending. The meeting will be posted vis-a-vis Aaron on the website. And I appreciate you coming, and good night, everyone.
Right.
Thank you very much for hosting this. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.